The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 281. Mr. Kiran. Henry and Theodore greeted Kiran respectfully when they saw him enter the Quinn family's home. Although they were enemies, the two of them still had to give in to Kiran. He was the most powerful one among them after all. They were useless compared to Kiran's power. The two of them knew that they were just drifting through life. They could not afford to offend Kiran. Kiran ignored them like they were dead to him and sat in the main seat. Seeing Kiran ignore them, Henry and Theodore were disheartened. Although they had destroyed the York family 20 years ago, they still had to surrender to a member of the York family in the end. Kiran. Warner just told me he was held in Swallow Bay. If my assumptions are correct, your children are being held there too. What? Henry and Theodore exclaimed joyfully. Do you want to rescue your children? Kiran asked with a smile. Yes, both said at the same time. In the next second, the two of them exchanged glances and bowed to Kiran. If Mr. Kiran will save our children, the life or death of our family will be for you to decide. Ha, Kiran chuckled. Are you stupid? You're asking me to save them just to kill them later? Henry and Theodore quickly shook their heads. No, we trust you. It doesn't matter. I know that all of you are the lackeys of Wolfgate and Imperial Dragon. I'm only saving your children to save my father-in-law and to drive a wedge between your families and Wolfgate. Everyone has their motives. Henry and Theodore were stunned. They did not expect Kiran to be so straightforward. They did not know what to say. I will get my revenge on you eventually, but my main priority right now is to kill the people from Wolfgate and Imperial Dragon. Kiran glared at them. Yes, sir, they nodded. I came here to give you 2 tasks, said Kiran. We'll do anything, Mr. Kiran, they replied instantly. Your first task is to find the exact location of Swallow Bay. I don't trust Warner. No problem. I'll have someone look into it, Henry agreed. What's the second task? Theodore was eager to prove himself too, so he quickly asked. The second task is to keep an eye on Warner. He will stay loyal to Wolfgate, so we must keep an eye on him, said Kiran. Henry and Theodore nodded in surprise. Theodore said, I'll be responsible for monitoring Warner. What's your plan? Kiran asked to make sure he would not make any mistakes. After I gave Tina to Warner, she's now his woman. She'll be able to get information easily staying by his side, said Theodore quickly. Kiran could not help but get angry at his answer. Theodore was selfish enough to give Tina to Warner just to save the Marsh family. However, he did not pity Tina at all. If she had helped him, she would not have ended up like this. There was no turning back the clock. I gave Warner 2 days to prepare so I can find his weak spots. You must get things done within these 2 days, Kiran emphasized. Don't worry, Mr. Kiran. We'll handle it, Henry and Theodore promised. Kiran stood up and said, I'll be waiting to hear from you. Take care, Mr. Kiran. They sent him off respectfully. When Kiran came out, he saw Serena had already driven away. He had no idea where she went, so he took a taxi to Neptune's Cove Karaoke. Kiran was intrigued by the woman with an unknown name and face and wanted to get more information from her. Meanwhile, Henry and Theodore had already begun their tasks. At Neptune's Cove Karaoke, after a night of hustle and bustle, it was quiet during the daytime. Serena was sitting in the car at the entrance of Neptune's Cove Karaoke with her hand on the car horn. She instantly honked the car horn. The sound echoed throughout the place for some time. Although the soundproofing in Neptune's Cove Karaoke was good, the car horn could still be heard clearly from the inside. The people who were asleep were instantly woken up by the honking. Lauren, who was in her leather outfit, hopped onto the ground and looked out the window. She saw Serena purposely honking the car horn in her car, making them unable to sleep. Damn you! Cursing angrily, she went downstairs. As soon as she got to the first floor, she opened the door to shout at Serena. However, Serena stepped on the accelerator, causing the car to fly toward Lauren like an arrow. Never in her wildest dreams did Lauren expect her to do that. She quickly backed away and dodged the car. Boom! The car hit the door and knocked over a bunch of tables and chairs. There was the sound of the car's airbag deploying. Serena was unharmed. She opened the door and looked at Lauren in surprise. Ha! I didn't think you'd be so afraid of dying. Go to hell. Lauren furiously kicked Serena from the side. Whoosh! Serena shifted slightly to dodge her kick. In her hand was a whip aimed at Lauren's chest. Lauren was outsmarted again. She tried to avoid it, but it was too late. Whip! Ah! Serena screamed in pain. The whip flew out of her grip, and she fell backward. Her body stumbled backward twice, but she was agile enough to quickly steady herself. She glanced over to see Lilian standing on stage with a mask on. Her slender figure was sexy and alluring. She was like an angel that had descended to earth. "Ha," Serena sneered out of jealousy. "Not bad. You knocked my whip out of my hands. You're no match for me, but for Kiran's sake, I let you get the fuck out," Lilian said coldly. "Get out? How dare you ask me to get out after you've fallen in love with Kiran? Wake up! Not only will I tear down this fox den of yours, but I'll make you parade through the streets and show people who you truly are." "Do you have a death wish?" Lilian sneered at her provocation. Chapter 282. What? Was I right? Are you going to kill me to silence me? Serena turned cold too. Lilian's body was as cold as ice. "Don't you make assumptions about others." "Assumptions? This is the truth," Serena scoffed. Serena straightened her back and looked around. "You stole Neptune's Cove karaoke. You asked for a fight in 7 days. You played the harp with Kiran, and you even met up with Kiran multiple times in the past few days. Why would you do all that if you did not have a crush on him?" Anger surged inside of Lilian, causing the instruments on the stage to vibrate. "Stop with the act and tell me the truth. Do you like Kiran?" Serena asked angrily. "I don't," Lilian said angrily. "Will you swear to God?" Serena asked joyfully. "Who do you think you are?" Lauren yelled. "That's none of your business," Serena retorted. She looked at Lilian and said, "Will you swear?" "Stay out of it." Lilian took a deep breath to control her anger. Slap!" Serena snorted. "That means you like Kiran. You're just too afraid to admit it." As soon as she said that, a ringing slap landed on her face. "Ah!" Serena screamed, while her body flew off like a kite with a broken string. Lilian's angelic voice sounded. "I don't like Kiran." Thump! Serena's body hit the ground. Cough, cough. Serena coughed up 2 mouthfuls of blood. "Ha ha ha, you're asking for it." Serena ignored the pain and wiped the blood from her mouth. "You're just a devil posing as an angel." Lilian had reached her limit. She waved her hand toward Serena, and bam! There was an explosion. Serena felt as if a force was lifting her body. She quickly looked toward the entrance and saw Kiran standing there. He had helped her block Lilian's attack. Kiran. Serena threw herself into his arms and passed out on the spot. Kiran hugged Serena tightly and put his right hand on her back. His inner strength entered her body, helping her breathe. Serena slowly opened her eyes and hooked her arms around Kiran's neck. She let out a cry. "Kiran, apart from Snow, I'm the only other woman you can fall for." She sincerely confessed her love. Kiran felt heartbroken to see Serena like this, but he only had Snow in his heart. "Kiran, leave with your woman. Don't disturb our peace." Lilian sounded cold. Kiran said angrily, "Neptune's Cove Karaoke is my place. Not only did you steal my place, but you even hurt my people." "Your people?" Lilian sneered. "I belong to Kiran." Serena leaned closer to Kiran. "Ha! Men are all perverts. They're never content with what they have." Lilian mocked him with a look of disgust. "It's none of your business," Serena retorted. "It's not, but you were the one who came here causing trouble." Lilian sounded annoyed. "Apologize to Serena," Kiran said to Lilian. "You want me to apologize to her?" Lilian felt as if she had heard the most absurd thing in the world, and she scoffed. "Kiran, are you insane?" "Insane?" Kiran put Serena down and looked at Lilian before saying, "Since the day I found out I was from the York family, no one was allowed to bully my family. What would you do if I did?" Lilian frowned. "Then, I'll fight back." Kiran's sharp words pierced through her like swords. "I'll see how you fight back." Lilian got into position. Bam! The two of them collided and froze mid-air before their bodies fell onto the stage. Kiran and Lilian looked at each other. Kiran did not use all his strength, but he was confident he could have knocked Lilian away with that blow just now. Unexpectedly, he failed. "Kiran, I don't want to fight you. If you want to fight, wait 3 more days for our battle. I promise that I won't disappoint." Kiran was about to fight her again. Pluck! Suddenly, the harp made a sound. Kiran stopped in his tracks as soon as he heard the joyful odyssey. His master's words were lingering in his ears. "Don't worry. I will kick you out of here after our battle." He turned around and carried Serena out of there. Serena was happy to be held in Kiran's arms even though she was in pain. She looked at Lilian and shouted, "Kiran belongs to Snow and me, so don't you dare try to steal him." "Moof." "I will never," Lilian snorted disdainfully. Serena wanted to fight back, but Kiran stopped her. "Pluck! Pluck! Pluck!" Just as Kiran walked out of the door, the harp sounded 3 times. Bam, bam, bam. Tables and chairs were thrown about. Even Serena's car went flying. Kiran trembled at the sight of the powerful force. Boom! The door of Neptune's Cove Karaoke was slammed shut by a strong wind. On the stage, Lilian took off her mask slowly. Me. Fall in love with Kiran? Never. Crack. The mask in her hands turned into dust. Asshole. Lilian sounded cold and resentful. Kiran walked out with Serena in his arms, but his mind was racing. How could she be so powerful at such a young age? It was unfathomable. Serena looked at him with resentment. "Kiran, you're not in love with her, right?" Kiran shook off his thoughts and said to Serena, "What were you doing there all of a sudden?" "To assert dominance," Serena said matter-of-factly. Kiran's lips twitched. "Are you that bored?" "Kiran, I didn't do this out of boredom. I'm doing this out of love," Serena corrected him. "If I had come any later, you would have been dead. So much for dominance," said Kiran. "I'm willing to risk my life for love," Serena said righteously. Kiran had no idea what to do with her. He shook his head and said, "Enough. I'm not interested in romance." "Kiran, you're wrong," Serena said sternly. "What do you mean? You should give the York family more heirs." Serena smiled seductively. Kiran said, "Do you want me to let you go?" "Okay," Serena agreed. "Here you go." Kiran threw Serena into the pond outside. Splash. "Kiran, you. Go cool off." Kiran walked away without looking back. "I'll make you warm up to me," Serena shouted at him. Kiran stumbled. That woman was uncontrollable. Beep, beep. Kiran and Serena's phones rang at the same time. Chapter 283. Kiran saw that it was Marshall, so he answered the call. Hello, Mr. Kiran. This is Marshall," Marshall said politely on the other end of the phone. "Is your father back?" "My father hasn't returned, but someone important has arrived. They asked us to arrange a party on a night cruise around Bayville tonight. They also wanted us to invite socialites, upper-class women, and big names in the business industry." Kiran frowned. Who was the person with such extraordinarily high standards? Kiran calmly replied, "I got it. Mr. Kiran, would you like to go? If so, I can prepare an invitation for you," Marshall asked respectfully. "No, thank you," Kiran refused. Marshall said, "Yes, sir. Beep, beep." Kiran hung up. Marshall wiped the sweat off his forehead. The clothes on his back were soaked. He was incredibly afraid of Kiran now. He finally understood what Kiran meant when he said that he was out of his league. To Marshall, Kiran was untouchable. In the past, he would be willing to pay $100,000 to not have anything to do with Kiran. Now, he would even be willing to pay $1 billion to turn back time. However, it was too late. As soon as Kiran hung up, Serena ran over to him, soaking wet. Her already sexy outfit was even sexier now that it was wet. The passers-by could not help but stop and stare. Ignoring their stares, Serena ran to Kiran. Lily called. She said she couldn't find Mr. Simmons's thesis, but she said that some important person wanted to cruise Bayville tonight. She asked what she could do to help. Kiran smirked. It seemed like Lily was really scared of him now. "Marshall told me, and I told him I'm not going." Serena nodded and said to Kiran, "We already knew that Bayville was filled with crouching tigers, but it seems like they're all emerging at the same time. It seems like that head of yours isn't empty after all," Kiran joked. "You..." Serena looked at him resentfully. She tried to tidy her clothes and said, "Look what you did to me." "Have you cooled off yet?" Kiran said. "Actually, I feel hot." Serena licked her lips seductively at Kiran. "Can't you be serious for once? Let's go get ready to attend the party tonight." Kiran glared at her. "I thought you said you weren't going?" Serena was confused. "I didn't say I wasn't going to sneak in," Kiran smirked. "Is Kiran about to do something bad? I want to do bad things with Kiran, Serena said charmingly. The combination of the way Serena said bad things and the sight of her drenched in water was indescribable. Kiran felt a chill down his spine. That woman would do anything to tempt him. Kiran left while Serena followed behind. The two of them went to a sportswear store to buy clothes and went to the dock. At the Ziegler's house, Warner had received an invitation from Marshall. He was skeptical about this cruise around Bayville, so he said, "Who would want to go on a cruise around Bayville? The Ziegler family is suffocating right now, yet all of you are out partying every night. Out with the old, in with the new. Isn't that how people are?" Regulus said out of nowhere. Warner trembled at his sudden voice. "Hello, Mr. Wolf." Regulus nodded. "Is this the cruise invitation from the Simmons family?" Warner immediately nodded. "Yes, it is." "That's great." Regulus looked delighted. "What do you have in mind?" Warner asked. "I'll ask the ship's captain to go to Swallow Bay. I'll drop those people off and let the children of the three families leave on that ship. When Kiran gets there 2 days later, we'll use those people as bait and send them all to hell," Regulus said icily. Warner could feel a chill down his spine, and he shivered. How many people were going to die? "Isn't it frightening?" Regulus smiled sinisterly. Warner nodded and flattered. "Mr. Wolf, you're brilliant." "I'll leave Michael there so he can descend to hell with everyone else on the island, including the celebrities, the businessmen, and Kiran. Then, everyone will know Kiran did this to them. Bayville will no longer miss the York family, and the Xander family will have nothing left to protect." Regulus sounded excited. Warner's eyes lit up with anticipation. He asked, "Mr. Wolf, should I go?" "You don't need to go. Just say that you're mourning your father." "What about the Quinn and Marsh family?" Warner asked. "They don't need to go too. The Simmons family is nothing in Bayville." "Why go?" Regulus sneered. Warner nodded. "Yes, sir. As for Kiran, don't anger him. Just prepare the boat and go to Swallow Bay as planned. Then we'll blow him up," Regulus reminded him. "Do I need to plant any traps in the boat?" There was a hint of hatred in Warner's eyes. "No, that'll be useless," said Regulus. "Yes, sir." Warner nodded again. Regulus called Henry and Theodore to tell them not to go to the cruise party, which they immediately agreed to. However, they quickly called Kiran right after to tell him about it. Kiran was surprised that Regulus told them not to go, although he did not ask why. Both of them told him that they would continue investigating Swallow Bay and monitoring Warner. It was getting late, so Kiran left the dock and returned to Marina Breeze Court. Snow was over the moon to see Kiran back. She went up to grab him and said, "Blooming Group sent me an invitation to a night cruise around Bayville. Should we go?" "No!" Kiran outright rejected her. "Okay then." Snow threw the invitation in the trash. Kiran smiled at how decisive she was. "Why are you smiling?" Snow turned around and asked. "I wanted to say that I will be going," Kiran said. "You're going?" Snow stared at Kiran, and then at the invitation in the trash. "I'm sneaking in to find out who's behind the Simmons family," said Kiran calmly. "Will it be dangerous?" Snow said worriedly. "Not knowing who they are is even more dangerous." Kiran's face darkened. "Take care. I'll wait for you to return," Snow said with concern. "I'll bring Serena with me," Kiran said frankly. Snow looked disappointed, but she did not say anything. "We'll be in the middle of the ocean. I don't want you to be in danger," Kiran explained. Snow was touched. She opened her arms to hug him and said, "How about we... Chapter 284. Did Snow want to sleep with Kiran? Kiran stared at Snow. Snow's beautiful round face was flushed as if she was drunk. Her almond-shaped eyes were sparkling. Her sexy, curvy body leaned against Kiran. No man would be able to refuse a woman like her. Her hair smelled of roses, which stimulated Kiran's senses even more. Kiran subconsciously hugged her even tighter. Snow was surprised. She hugged him back too. At that moment, Kiran could do whatever he wanted. Snow belonged to him and him only, and he was about to lose his mind. Kiran kissed Snow's forehead and said, "Before I avenge my family and find your father, I can't get distracted by love." Snow was shocked by Kiran's rejection. Snow was touched by his sweet words. She felt like she was being enveloped by a pot of honey. "Honey, I love you." Kiran got teary-eyed after Snow professed her love. When a woman loved a man, it was not about the physical intimacy but winning her heart. The ugly woman who demanded to get a divorce was now confessing her love for him. With time, anything was possible. Kiran held her and said softly, "I love you too." Happiness filled the room while they were in each other's arms. True love was not dependent on physical desires. Snow's love for Kiran was overflowing. The two of them stayed home all afternoon, enjoying the peace and quiet. Serena did not disturb them. On the other hand, Margaret and Rain were not aware they lived there. At 6 in the evening, Serena called Kiran and told him to go to the dock. Marshall's ship would set sail at 7. Kiran let go of Snow and said, "My wife is incredibly attractive." "What do you mean?" Snow asked. "We haven't slept together yet, but I already can't wait," Kiran teased. "Disgusting." Snow punched him twice. Kiran grabbed her hand and kissed it. "Get some rest. Don't worry about me." Snow nodded and helped Kiran tidy his clothes. "Serena loves you too, so don't always bully her. I can treat her as a co-worker, but not my wife." Kiran refused. "Why not?" Snow asked. Kiran said, "I want you. If I'm with her, she would eat me alive." "Fuck off." Snow threw a pillow at Kiran and said, "I'll eat you alive when you come back." "Where will your mouth go?" Kiran smirked. "Jerk." Snow's face reddened. Kiran had already run out the door. Snow's worries had disappeared. She was now filled with happiness and embarrassment. Kiran looked relaxed, too. Loving someone meant making them happy, and men should be the ones to go through hardships to protect their women. When Kiran got downstairs, he saw Serena in a body-hugging outfit. She looked like someone very capable, and he nodded in satisfaction. "Try to guess if I'm wearing any underwear," Serena leaned over and asked. Kiran quickly turned away, almost coughing up blood. "Theft," Serena laughed. As soon as they arrived at the dock, they saw a cruise ship named Alice. It was lavishly decorated, and it was painted red by the sunset. Glamorously dressed men and women were on the deck while Marshall stood beside them, welcoming them on board. Kiran noticed a young man sitting under an umbrella on the third deck. His back was to Kiran, but he exuded an aura that made him stand out from the rest. Kiran smirked and looked at Serena. "You said the demise of the York family was because of money and power, but they used money as a cover-up, right?" Serena nodded and asked Kiran, "Why are you mentioning that now? The amount of money that went into Blooming Group's rapid development is quite a hefty amount," Kiran said thoughtfully. Gasp! Serena was shocked. "Why have I never thought of that?" "It's not your fault. It hit me just now too," Kiran said as he stared at the young man's back. "I thought you were against the Simmons family because of Dragonsmount's secrets, but I guess it's not as simple as that," Serena said. "I'll take my time with that. I'm just curious to know why so many people are interested in Dragonsmount." What Kiran meant to say was, did it have something to do with Dragonsmount, or was it the York family? In his eyes, the death of his family was not as simple as he thought. "Let's go in," Serena said. "Have you decided on a persona?" Kiran asked. Serena pointed to the waiters who were about to enter after her and said, "How about that?" "Sure." The two of them smiled and nodded at each other before walking to the waiters. After passing by them and tapping their pressure points, the waiters suddenly had the urge to go to the toilet. They informed their colleagues and scurried off. Kiran and Serena exchanged glances and followed them in. 3 minutes later, they came out dressed as waiters, pushing items onto the ship. Serena wanted to change her clothes and hide after she got on the ship, but Kiran stopped her. He pulled her into a small room and took out a bottle of powder. He wiped it all over her face, and her face was enlarged. On the other hand, Kiran made himself look older. "If you date me now, you'd be robbing the cradle," Serena teased. "You should be grateful that I would even want you," Kiran retorted. "No way." Serena did not believe him. She took out her phone and looked at herself. She almost vomited at the sight of her face. "You're insane. Why did you make me so ugly?" "It's the best option." "You'd stay safe on the boat," Kiran laughed. "What about my body?" Serena smirked devilishly. "Then, take off your clothes," Kiran said carelessly. "Zip." Serena opened up her zipper, and Kiran was blinded by the sight. Kiran turned away immediately. "You pfeffed," Serena laughed triumphantly. "In case we have to jump into the water, wearing less would create less resistance." Kiran was losing his mind. That woman always had such bizarre thoughts. "Mr. Marsh, what if someone sees us?" A woman's nervous voice sounded outside the door. Serena immediately looked at Kiran. Kiran pulled her into the corner of the room to hide. Creak. The door opened, and a man and a woman walked in. Chapter 285. "It's just a quickie. It'll be over soon," the man said. "I'm wearing a gown," the woman said. "It's because of the gown that makes me want you so much," said the man. "You're so bad, Mr. Marsh," the woman said. While they were talking, they started undressing. The next moment was filled with R-rated scenes and sounds. Kiran and Serena were huddled in the corner so that they could see everything. Kiran did not want to look, but Serena was watching them intently. Serena would make him look whenever he tried not to. Kiran was speechless. In the end, he had to dirty his eyesight along with Serena. The two of them were fast indeed. There was little dialogue and a lot of movement. After they finished, they left in a hurry. "Pfeft!" Serena laughed. "Kiran, not only does wearing less clothes reduce resistance, but it'll also help you do things faster." Kiran rolled his eyes. "It's not the time to be joking. What's wrong?" Serena stopped teasing him when she saw his serious face. "The Quinn and Marsh families told me that none of them would come." "Isn't Mr. Marsh part of their family?" Beep, beep. His phone rang. There was a message. He opened it. Yvonne had sent a map. "Yvonne, my grandfather asked me to forward this to you. It's the location of Swallow Bay." Kiran quickly clicked on it and saw that it was 100 kilometers from the dock. "It seems like the Quinn family is taking my tasks seriously," said Kiran. "Theodore's eyes are always looking left and right. I don't have a good feeling about him," Serena said. "Let's talk after we observe a little more." After replying to Yvonne, he went out with Serena. After disguising themselves as waiters, no one recognized them. They pushed the wine cart back and forth to different decks, and people would ask them for more wine. When they went to the east deck on the second floor, there was a young couple drinking wine. They were the couple in the room earlier. Kiran glanced at the man who looked somewhat like Theodore. Now, he was certain that someone from the Marsh family was here. When the man noticed Kiran, he looked at him too. "Mr. Marsh, do you know him?" the woman next to him asked. He shook his head. "Why would I know a waiter? Since you spend your days reveling at different clubs all the time? I thought all waiters would know you," said the woman with a hint of jealousy. "I'm Forrest Marsh. I don't sleep with just any woman," Mr. Marsh said arrogantly. "Mr. Marsh, can I go home with you after the party?" The woman pleaded flirtatiously. "Of course. I'll show you my true manliness tonight." Mr. Marsh was full of confidence. "You must be the manliest person on earth." The woman sounded lustful. Kiran pretended like he did not hear anything and pushed the cart away, but he took note of the name, Forrest Marsh. However, this was just a side quest. On that ship were many big names and successful businessmen from Bayville. Kiran had seen many of them during his conflicts with the three families, but he could not help but wonder about Marshall and the mysterious guy. What gimmick did he use to make all of them come? When Kiran arrived on the third floor, he finally saw the young man's face. He was about 6 feet tall, handsome, and entirely decked out in luxurious brands. He exuded a charismatic and noble charm. What shocked Kiran the most was that he was trained in martial arts, and he was quite skilled in it too. Marshall was standing in front of the man who had 3 women around him. The man glanced at them and frowned. He looked down at his wine glass, not wanting to look at the women again. Clearly, he was not happy with the selection of women. Marshall broke into a cold sweat as he shooed the women away. The 3 women left in disappointment. When Marshall selected the women, he promised them $1 million if they got chosen. Too bad the man only glanced at them. "Isn't Snow the most beautiful woman in Bayville?" "Is she here?" the man asked. "Mr. Ludwig, I sent her an invitation, but she didn't come," said Marshall. "How dare she not come after being invited?" Mr. Ludwig sounded furious. Marshall quickly reminded him, "Snow is married to Kiran of the York family." "So what if she's married? Does that change how she looks?" Mr. Ludwig sounded upset. Frightened, Marshall shook his head. "No, call her and ask if she's coming." Mr. Ludwig had a twisted expression. "Yes, sir." Marshall ran off to the side to make the call. Mr. Ludwig looked at the sparkling ocean. He exuded the aura of a king. Everyone else was just a mere ant to him. Marshall called Snow, but the call did not go through. In the end, he said through gritted teeth, "I called, but she did not pick up." "Oomph! Useless piece of shit," Smash! Mr. Ludwig smashed his wine glass on the floor. Marshall was taken aback. "After the party, I want to see snow on my bed," said Mr. Ludwig. Marshall's head was spinning. He was asking for Kiran's wife. However, Marshall could not afford to offend him, so he said, "Yes, sir." Mr. Ludwig looked toward the ocean, ignoring Marshall. Marshall left nervously. Kiran stared at Mr. Ludwig's back. The only thing he could think about was throwing him into the ocean. How dare he take advantage of his wife? Just as he was about to do something, the cruise ship sounded its whistle and started moving. Mr. Ludwig stood up and raised his head to look at the sea. The smile on his face made him look like he ruled the world. "Mr. Ludwig, what are your plans for tonight's voyage?" Marshall returned to ask. "Let the ship sail freely for 2 hours as we enjoy the sea breeze and the beautiful night." Mr. Ludwig's eyes lit up and were practically shining. "Should I get you some women to keep you company for now?" Marshall asked. "I'll go down and look around myself. If I see anyone I like, bring them to me," said Mr. Ludwig. Marshall was relieved that he decided to pick himself. How would he know his taste in women? He bowed and said, "This way, Mr. Ludwig." Mr. Ludwig's posture was upright and his handsome face looked even more dashing in the sunset. He noticed Kiran at the stairs but ignored him, thinking that he was a mere waiter. Kiran stared at his back like he wanted him dead. Mr. Ludwig arrived on the second floor. His gaze fell upon the woman next to Mr. Marsh, and his eyes lit up. Chapter 286. Marshall looked over and saw a man and a woman. When he realized that it was Forrest Marsh, he started to get nervous. "Bring me that woman." Mr. Ludwig was about to leave after saying that. "Mr. Ludwig, how about a different woman?" Marshall was weeping on the inside as he asked Ludwig. Mr. Ludwig stopped in his tracks and shot him a sharp glance. "Is there a problem? The man next to the woman is Forrest Marsh. He's the grandson of the Marsh family, and that's his woman," Marshall explained. Although the Simmons were an influential family in Bayville, they were incomparable to the three families. He dared not try to steal Forrest's woman. Thus, he told him who the man was, hoping Mr. Ludwig would change his mind. However, Mr. Ludwig's face got even darker after hearing his explanation. He frowned and stared at Marshall. "The Marsh family?" "Yes," Marshall nodded. "I heard that the Marsh family is just miserably waiting to be sacrificed by Kiran." "Are you still afraid of them?" Mr. Ludwig said loudly on purpose so that Forrest would hear him. Forrest was getting all touchy-feely with his woman, waiting for the party to be over so they could get down to business. When he heard Mr. Ludwig ridiculing the Marsh family, his face darkened. Marshall was in a dilemma. Mr. Ludwig was his financial backer, so he could not offend him. Forrest was a member of the Marsh family, so he could not offend him either. Forrest looked at Marshall. Where did this madman come from? Madman? The word was ringing in Marshall's ears. He almost fainted on the spot. He immediately looked at Mr. Ludwig, worried his backer would get angry. Mr. Ludwig was not angry. Instead, he looked at Forrest calmly and said, "My name is Hans Ludwig." "Never heard of it," Forrest said rudely. "That's normal. I'm not from here." Hans did not care. "That's none of my business." "Why are you here?" Forrest asked bluntly. "I want to have a drink with your woman, so name a price," Hans said arrogantly. Forrest's face turned stormy. Was he actually trying to buy his woman from him? Did he not know how rich the Marsh family was? Marshall? Is he insane? Marshall was scared out of his wits. He genuinely had no idea what to do. "Is that a no?" Hans shot him a mocking look. Forrest sneered. Hans did not expect such a response from Forrest. He looked at the woman and pointed. "They'll give you $1 million to drink with me." Hans then glanced at Marshall. Marshall quickly took out a check and wrote $1 million on it. Forrest's woman shivered when he said $1 million. She was shocked that Mr. Ludwig would want her. $1 million for a drink? Her mind said yes, but her body stayed in place. Forrest only shook his head and smirked. Forrest was embarrassed that he was trying to steal his woman. He even threw money at her to make her cheat on him. He snorted, "Hans, I don't care who you are. You better apologize to her. Give her 10 million, Hans said to Marshall. Marshall was sweating profusely, but he dared not disobey. He immediately wrote a check for 10 million and looked at the woman. The woman was already smiling at Hans. $1 million did not move her, but 10 million? She would not be able to earn that much in her lifetime, not even if she stayed with Forrest. Hans took a wine glass from Kiran's cart and shook the check in front of the woman. She hesitantly looked at Forrest. Forrest looked at her, waiting for her to make a choice. The woman quickly made her decision. She smiled apologetically at Forrest before walking up to Hans. "Hello, Mr. Ludwig. I'm—" Splash! Hans poured the wine on top of the woman's head. "Ah!" the girl screamed. Hans stuffed the check into the woman's mouth. The woman shut her mouth but quickly opened it again to take out the check in case it got wet. When she saw that it was $10 million, she bowed excitedly. "Thank you, Mr. Ludwig. Thank you, Mr. Ludwig." Hans ignored her and shrugged at Forrest. There was nothing that money could not fix. Forrest felt as if he had been slapped with the sole of his shoe. He was one of the wealthiest heirs in Bayville. He was surrounded by women. Having his woman taken away from him by Hans was incredibly humiliating. "You've crossed the line," Forrest said through gritted teeth. Hans did not respond. He took the first $1 million check from Marshall and looked at the woman. "Kneel." She hesitated for a moment before plopping onto the ground. The position, height, and placement made it look like. Hans threw the check in her face. She caught it and said smilingly, "Thank you, Mr. Ludwig." Forrest burst into anger. "Are you here to assert your dominance in Bayville?" "Ha ha ha." Hans laughed. "If that's how you want to put it, suit yourself." He looked at the crowd and said, "Anything I want, I will get." He lifted the woman's chin and said, "I came to Bayville for Snow Xander, and I organized this party for her. I'm very angry that she's not here." The woman was in pain from his pinch, but she forced a smile and dared not say a word. Serena hid behind Kiran and held him back, afraid he would do something stupid. Kiran had wanted to slap Hans long ago. After hearing that he was here for Snow, he was not in a rush anymore. There must be a reason, and he was going to find out what that reason was. If he wanted to play, Kiran would play with him. However, if he ever laid a finger on his wife, he would castrate that man. Kiran swore inwardly. "Aren't you afraid Kiran would kill you for touching Snow?" Forrest sneered. "Humph." Hans pushed the kneeling woman to the ground. "Why would I be afraid of Kiran?" Gasp. The crowd inhaled sharply. They could not help but wonder how Kiran would react if he heard that. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, a man's hearty laughter was heard among the crowd. Kiran was shocked when he heard the laugh. Regulus was there too. Chapter 287. Regulus's imposing figure and fierce face stood out from the crowd. He looked like a savage who lived in the wild. Many were terrified by his calm yet bold demeanor. "Who are you?" Hans looked at Regulus. "Like you, I'm someone who looks down on Kiran." Regulus sounded calm. Look down on Kiran? Everyone looked at Regulus in shock. Kiran had trampled all over the three families in Bayville. It was going to be the rise of the York family. It was surprising that there were people who looked down on him. Hans did not care about Regulus. On the contrary, he said arrogantly, "I'm not interested in becoming your acquaintance. Ha ha ha." Instead of getting angry, Regulus laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Hans was unhappy with the way he responded. "A man with character. Now I know why you like married women like Snow," Regulus said. "Shut up," Hans shouted. He felt he was being ridiculed. Regulus said calmly, "Calm down. I have a suggestion, but only if you want to hear it." "What is it?" Hans asked, suppressing his anger. "Snow misses her parents very much. She has reunited with her mother, but not her father. If you can help her see her father again, she might throw herself into your arms as a token of appreciation," said Regulus confidently. Hans was silent. This was important information. Serena hugged Kiran to stop him from acting on impulse. When he heard Snow's father mentioned, his anger dissipated instantly. Serena sighed in relief, but she still felt bitter at how deeply Kiran loved Snow. If she had not held him back, he would have killed them already. "If you're interested, we could take this ship to see Snow's father right now." Regulus presented him with an opportunity. "Why should I believe you?" Hans sounded cold, but seemed to consider it. "Snow's father is somewhere near. Since you're on a cruise anyway, why not enjoy the bright moon and sea breeze while you become her hero? Aren't you going to seize this opportunity?" Regulus was persuasive. Marshall was worried that something bad would happen, so he said softly, "Mr. Ludwig, you need to calm." "Shut up!" Hans interrupted him rudely and looked at Regulus. "Fine, I'll go." Regulus gave him a thumbs up. "Don't worry, I'll turn you into a hero. Mr. Ludwig pointed to the third deck and said, "Let's go up and have a chat." Regulus nodded and walked up to the third deck with his head held high. "Marshal, take care of the party. Don't disturb unless it's an emergency." Mr. Lee reminded him without even looking back. "Yes, sir," Marshal said obediently before returning to the party. Kiran raised his eyebrows and looked up at the third deck. Instead of following them up, he calmed himself down. He shot Serena a look, and they pushed the wine cart to the back end of the ship. "You scared me. I thought you were going to do something." Serena patted her chest nervously. "I was going to, but I wanted to learn more about Mr. Ludwig. More importantly, I want to save Snow's father." Kiran regained his composure. The York family owed the Xander family too much. He could not just let Michael be in danger. Michael's life was more important than his dignity. By the way, I think Regulus met up with Warner. There seemed to be traces of the tracking spell on him, but the sea breeze and water vapor from the sea weakened it, so I didn't notice it at first, Serena mentioned. "It's okay. After we arrive at the place, we'll save Snow's father and kill the rest of them," Kiran said calmly. Serena did not stop him, but she made a motion that would make Kiran's nose bleed. When Serena noticed Kiran staring, she moved her hands away from her chest. "What are you looking at? My boobs almost got deformed from hugging you." Kiran turned away to stop her from continuing with the nonsense. "My boobs look better now," Serena said on purpose. Kiran was speechless at her bluntness. There was no need to acquaint themselves with other people now, so they pushed the cart aside and changed out of the waiter uniforms. Now they looked like guests at the party. However, they were slightly underdressed. Kiran took out his phone and clicked on the location Yvonne sent him. He was surprised to see that the ship was heading in that direction. Serena peeked at his phone and was overjoyed. "We're headed there. Perfect." Kiran nodded excitedly. "Bitch, I'll beat you up." Suddenly, there were sounds of hitting and cursing coming from the second deck. Kiran and Serena went up and saw Forrest violently beating his woman. "Unfaithful women like her should be fed to the sharks," Serena whispered to Kiran. "I'll feed you to the sharks," Forrest repeated her sentence. Kiran and Serena almost laughed out loud. "Mr. Ludwig, save me!" The woman hoped Mr. Ludwig would save her from Forrest, so she shouted to the deck above them. Mr. Ludwig, chatting with Regulus on the third deck, heard Forrest scolding her, but he ignored them. He just used her to get at Forrest. There was nothing he could do to save her now. Hans stood up and shouted to the lower deck, "Shut the fuck up!" The woman was terrified. She kneeled at him and begged, "Mr. Ludwig, save me!" Woo! As if a strong gust of wind had blown by, the woman's body flew toward the sea. She screamed for help, but it was too late. Splash! She fell into the sea. Standing on the second deck, a muscular figure withdrew his hand. It was he who threw her into the ocean. "Throw Forrest in together to feed the sharks," Hans ordered the man. The man said nothing as he walked toward Forrest. Forrest saw how effortlessly he had thrown his woman into the ocean and backed away in fear. I am the grandson of the Marsh family. If you..." "Ah!" He grabbed Forrest by his collar and was about to throw him into the ocean. "Put him down," Regulus shouted. The man snorted and said, "Who do you think you..." Before he could finish, his eyes widened. Chapter 288. Hans started screaming too. Regulus held Hans up in the air with one arm. Hans was kicking his legs and flailing his arms in the air as he yelled. "Put Mr. Ludwig down," the muscular man shouted. "Whoever dares to lay a finger on the three families will die," Regulus said coldly. Forrest felt as if he had met his savior. He wanted to hug Regulus for standing up for him. He thought that Regulus and Hans were on the same team. "Why are you helping Forrest?" Hans asked Regulus. "The three families are mine. Don't you look at the master before you beat their dog." Regulus raised his voice. Gasp! Everyone looked at each other in shock upon hearing that. Although Forrest was not happy with what he said, he dared not refute him after his grandpa told him about the forces behind them. "Let him go," Hans ordered. The muscular man put Forrest down. Forrest was so frightened that his legs went weak. He plopped to the ground with his face as pale as paper. Thud! Regulus dropped Hans down too. Hans's eyes were livid. He knew martial arts and was embarrassed that he fell for Regulus's surprise attack. Being dropped onto the ground was even more humiliating. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who's going to help you find your father-in-law." Regulus looked imposing. "Mr. Ludwig?" Hans's man rushed to him and was about to attack Regulus. Hans shooed him away and massaged his sore muscles. "I hope our cooperation will go smoothly." "Ha ha." Regulus laughed. "A true gentleman knows when to yield. If you want to kill me after this, feel free to find me. Don't worry, I'm great at holding grudges." Although Regulus and Hans were not in direct conflict anymore, they had accumulated a lot of resentment for each other. Kiran and Serena were intrigued by the scene before them. It seemed like there was going to be a big surprise today. "Continue the party," Hans said to the onlookers embarrassedly. Everyone hurried off, afraid that they would get hurt next. Hans and Regulus were no longer polite and friendly to each other. They just stood there in silence. Kiran pulled Serena down to the bottom of the cruise ship. "Kiran, what are we doing here?" Serena asked. "Every cruise ship has an emergency boat and we have to find it beforehand," Kiran said while looking around. "What do you mean?" "Regulus is acting weird today. We have to be prepared in case of emergencies." Kiran then found the emergency speedboat. "Aren't you going to kill Regulus?" Serena was surprised. "Killing Regulus is easy, but I have to know more about this Hans person and ensure the safety of Snow's father." Serena nodded. "You're right. You could kill him easily, but it'll be hard to gauge Hans' ability." Kiran nodded and looked around. "Serena, stay here and don't move." "Stay here?" Serena asked nervously. "Keep an eye on this boat. I'll go up there and rescue them." "After I do, we'll meet here," Kiran said seriously. "I'd rather place poison on it so no one can get close to it." Serena wanted to go with Kiran. Swallow Bay is Wolfgate's headquarters. Many of their men will be there. I have to take care of Snow's father, so it'll be hard for me to take care of you too. It's best if I save them. Don't worry, I'm wearing fewer clothes. It'll create less resistance so I can jump into the sea, Serena joked. "Stop joking around," Kiran said seriously. "Does this count as joking around?" Serena unzipped her top. Kiran had already turned around and walked out, afraid of blinding himself. However, the image lingered in his mind. He reminded himself repeatedly, "My wife is the most beautiful woman." The thought of Snow reminded him that rescuing Michael was his priority. Serena did not know what he was thinking, but she was happy to see him defeated once again. She said with concern, "Kiran, please be careful." Kiran gestured, "Okay," and left. When Kiran went out, he could vaguely see an island in front of him with lights on it. He quickly clicked on his phone and saw that Swallow Bay was less than 10 kilometers away. Kiran was extremely excited. It took no effort to find the place. He looked up at the third deck. Hans and Regulus were not speaking. He could tell they were not on good terms. Kiran smirked. It was his time to shine. Kiran walked to the empty first deck and jumped down into the sea. He breathed in, and his body floated on the water like a boat as he swam toward the island. The cruise ship may be fast, but it was not faster than him. In one breath, he made it to Swallow Bay. He could instantly sense many people on the island. There were many men with varying strengths, but the strongest ones were even stronger than the men he killed before. Still, they were nothing compared to him. Kiran's body was as light as a feather. He headed directly toward the light without making a sound. When he approached the bright light, he saw a large, luxurious villa. There were sounds of laughter and children playing. Kiran was stunned. He quickly looked in and saw a 3,000 square feet living room with a large round sofa. It was filled with lavishly dressed men and women, and several children playing on the floor. His eyes were drawn immediately to a man crawling on all fours, carrying a child on his back like a horse. The child pulled the man's hair and kicked, shouting, "Giddy up, ah ha ha ha." Everyone laughed at that scene. All the other kids were waiting to ride on his back too. The man was sweating profusely. "You're too slow," the child on top of him said, pulling his hair. "Ah." The man screamed and looked up. Kiran got a good look at his face and was shocked. In the next second, he was filled with anger. Chapter 289. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, and a square-shaped face. Despite his natural air of virtuousness, his movements were cautious and restrained as he fought to hold back his pain. What shocked Kiran most was how much this man resembled the younger version of Harold. He and Snow shared noticeable similarities, too. Was this his father-in-law, Michael Xander? With a pang of concern, Kiran rose to his feet and made to enter. Suddenly, a middle-aged man among the onlookers stood up, strutted over to Michael, and kicked him. "Can't you act like a horse properly, scum? Do you want to die?" Thump! Michael was sent sprawling across the floor. The child riding him fell as well and started howling. Instantly, the incensed adults stormed over and landed a barrage of kicks on Michael, vile curses spewing out of their mouths. "You think Shannon can save you just because she got out? In your dreams? You Xanders offered yourselves to be the York's lapdogs, didn't you? Feel free to act like a dog here, then. Just because Shannon escaped the fate of becoming a nanny, you think your fate can be changed too? You'll have to bear her share of the duty too from now on. Kids, pee on him!" Someone shouted an instruction to the children. At once, several children approached eagerly and took off their pants. Michael used his arms to shield himself but did not dare to move away. Kiran felt like his heart was being stabbed by 1,000 swords. How many years of oppression had it taken to crush the unyielding spirit of a person like Michael? Unable to rein in his rage any longer, he flung his hand up and sent a gust of internal force striking the chandelier on the ceiling. With a click, the lights went out, and the fixture plunged. The chandelier slammed into the floor with a deafening crash. "Ah!" Agonized screams erupted from the crowd underneath. Kiran dashed into the room, pulled Michael to his feet, and rushed to the other end. Michael felt like his body was flying, much to his astoundment. When he heard the shrieks, he opened his mouth to ask what was going on. "Shh! Don't talk!" Kiran whispered. Michael's question immediately died on his lips. In the blink of an eye, Kiran brought him to a room on the top floor of the mansion. The moment they went inside, Michael threw his arms around Kiran. "Are you Kiran, Snow's husband?" Kiran was surprised that Michael knew him, but the older man's crushing embrace and excited expression prompted a surge of mixed feelings in him. Before, he had expressed dissatisfaction with Shannon's return and even messed with her to assuage his anger. Now that he had witnessed Michael's humiliation, he realized Shannon had only acted the way she did because of her love for her husband. It was even more heartbreaking to think they had experienced all this torment for the York family's sake. For 20 years, the Xander family had faithfully stood by the York family. For 15 years, Michael and Shannon had suffered for the York family's sake without regret. Their devotion immensely moved Kiran. It was a debt he would never be able to repay. "Yes, I'm Kiran," he replied, his voice breaking. "My boy!" Michael burst into tears and hugged Kiran tight. "The York family has an heir. The York family finally has an heir." Michael, a grown man, was reduced to a bawling mess. Kiran's heart was overwhelmed with the intensity of his feelings. This might be the greatest form of sincerity and protection in the world. Suppressing his emotions, he said, "Now's not the time to discuss this. What's going on with those people down there?" "Those people are from the 3 big families. Shannon and I were forced to be their nannies while we were locked up." Michael stopped himself from crying. The veins on Kiran's forehead bulged. He wished he could charge downstairs at once and massacre them. Michael grabbed his arm, a question suddenly occurring to him. "Why are you here? By the way, did someone among them die just now?" Chapter 290. "We don't have time for that. I'm going to get you out of here now and we'll go back to Bayville together." Kiran gripped him with his other hand. "I can't leave." Michael did not budge. "Why?" Kiran was dumbfounded. "If I do, they'll attack you and the Xander family. You'll be in danger." Fear crept into Michael's eyes. His father-in-law's kindness touched Kiran, but he also felt sorry for the terrified man. He clasped Michael's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about that! I'm very powerful!" Really?" Michael was clearly unconvinced. "How about this? I'll let you see it with your own eyes." It was also part of Kiran's intention to scope out Regulus and Hans's arrangements. Michael nodded in confusion. Kiran produced a packet of powder from his pocket. "Close your eyes. I'm going to turn you into another person. You'll see." Michael closed his eyes and Kiran began to smear the powder all over his face. In a flash, Michael's appearance morphed into that of another person. When Kiran was done, he turned on his phone camera. "Have a look." Michael glanced down and was immediately staggered to find he no longer looked like himself. "Is this a disguise spell?"
"I'll explain when we get back. Wait here, I'll get someone out there to be your substitute," said Kiran. Michael inclined his head in relief. Kiran spun on his heel and went out. At this moment, The lights outside had been restored. However, wails and cries continued to permeate the air. Several members of Wolfgate had arrived on the scene as well. Lifeless bodies of adults and children were strewn over the floor. Kiran did not feel a lick of sympathy for them. In his opinion, these people deserved to die. He darted into a corner where a Wolfgate member was hiding. Before the latter could detect his presence, he struck him on the back of the neck and knocked him out on the spot. He then tossed the unconscious man's body over his shoulder and returned to the room swiftly. When Michael saw Kiran reappear with another man, his eyes widened in shock. At the same time, he was finally convinced of Kiran's capabilities. "You'll need to swap clothes with him." Kiran began undressing the Wolfgate member. Michael did as he was told. Kiran began applying makeup on the Wolfgate member. After an exchange of clothes, the member was transformed into the spitting image of Michael. Michael was relieved and delighted to see this. After finishing his work deftly, Kiran sealed the substitute's throat, rendering him mute. Then he stood up and looked at Michael. "Well then, shall we go out and enjoy the show?" While the older man did not comprehend his words, he had absolute trust in Kiran's strength. Kiran led Michael outside. On the way, he snagged a gray jacket from another Wolfgate member and put it on. They took advantage of their disguises to slip out of the mansion. Michael sneaked a glance inside the house and almost vomited at the sight of the corpses being carried out. Kiran sighed inwardly. His father-in-law was really a soft-hearted person. Worried that Michael would give the game away, he steered him directly toward the seaside. At that moment, the cruise ship sailed into the port of Swallow Bay. The port seemed to have been tailor-made for it, accommodating it perfectly. Above the deck, Hans's eyes lit up with joy as he glimpsed a brightly illuminated mansion in the distance, surrounded by exquisite bay trails. It was like a fairyland on Earth. Knowing the cruise ship had docked, the party guests filed onto the deck and gasped in wonder as they took in the beauty of Swallow Bay. Some of them even started live streaming. Regulus's lip curled. To him, they were like a flock of lambs entering the wolves' den.